You wake up before your alarm. Not because you're disciplined. Because your mind never really slept. Your phone says 5:12 a.m. You stare at the ceiling and calculate. Rent, food, transport, that one bill you've been avoiding. You already know the numbers don't work. They never do. But you get up anyway. You wash your face in cold water because hot water costs money. You wear the same clothes you wore yesterday. They still look clean enough. You check your phone. No new messages. No miracles. You step outside. The air is quiet, but your chest is loud. Congratulations. You are poor. Not homeless. Not starving. Just poor enough that every decision hurts. You walk instead of taking transport. It's 40 minutes. Your shoes are thin. The ground reminds you of that every step. Rich people listen to music on their way to work. You listen to your thoughts. What if prices go up again? What if the landlord knocks? What if you get sick? You arrive at work already tired. Your job isn't hard. It's endless. You don't get paid for thinking. You get paid for standing, lifting, waiting, smiling. Your boss tells you to hurry. You nod. You always nod. At lunch, you don't eat much. Not because you're dieting. Because tomorrow exists. Your coworkers talk about plans. Movies. Trips. New phones. You laugh at the right moments. You don't talk about your life. You've learned something important. Poverty is embarrassing even when it's not your fault. Your shift ends, but your day doesn't. You stop by the market. You count coins before you touch anything. You compare prices like your life depends on it. Because sometimes, it does. You put something back, then something else. You buy the cheapest option and still feel guilty. On the way home, you see people sitting in cafes. They're relaxed. They're unafraid of tomorrow. You wonder what that feels like. At home, the lights stay off. Electricity costs money. Silence is free. You check your phone again. Still nothing. You scroll social media. Big smiles. New cars. Hard work pays. You close the app. You don't need motivation. You need margin. You lie on your bed and stare at the wall. People say poverty builds character. But what it really builds is exhaustion. You want to plan your future. But the present keeps interrupting. You want to save money. But emergencies keep happening. Your shoes tear. Your phone screen cracks. Someone gets sick. Each small problem is a disaster. Because when you're poor, there is no cushion. There is no, just in case. There is only right now. At night, sleep comes slowly. Your body is tired. Your mind is working overtime. You replay conversations. You imagine worst-case scenarios. You promise yourself tomorrow will be better. You don't fully believe it. Morning comes too fast. And you do it again. Not because you're weak. Because you don't have a choice. This is what it sucks about being poor. Not the lack of money. The lack of peace. You weren't always this tired. There was a time you believed effort was enough. That if you did everything right, life would eventually notice. That belief didn't die all at once. It wore out slowly. It started earlier than you like to admit. Back when you were younger, you noticed small differences. Other kids had new shoes. Yours were repaired. Other kids brought lunch. You learned how to say you weren't hungry. You learned early how to blend in. Teachers talked about the future like it was guaranteed. College, careers, potential. You nodded along. But potential doesn't survive without support. When assignments required resources, you improvised. When trips cost money, you stayed behind. When opportunities appeared, they quietly passed you. Nobody said you couldn't succeed. They just didn't make it possible. You learned something important very young. The world does not punish poverty loudly. It ignores it politely. Years pass. You grow older, but the gap grows faster. People around you begin to move forward. Internships, certifications, connections. You begin to realize something uncomfortable. Talent isn't rare. Access is. You try to keep up. You work harder. You sleep less. You push through sickness. But effort without rest becomes desperation. You start making decisions based on survival, not growth. You take the job that pays now, not the one that builds later. You sacrifice learning for earning. You postpone dreams until they feel childish. People say, just take a risk. But risk is expensive. Failure is only romantic when you can afford it. You can't. So you play it safe. And safety becomes another trap. Relationships change too. You avoid dating seriously. Love asks questions you can't answer. Where do you see yourself in 5 years? You see unpaid bills. You cancel plans last minute. You stop explaining why. Friends stop inviting you. Not out of cruelty. Out of inconvenience. You don't blame them. Poverty makes you hard to include. You become quieter. Not because you have nothing to say. Because you're tired of pretending everything is okay. You start measuring your worth against others. Not intentionally. It just happens. Someone younger than you buys a car. Someone lazier than you gets promoted. Someone less skilled lives easier. You tell yourself not to be bitter. But bitterness isn't a choice. It's a byproduct. At work, you become replaceable. You don't complain. You don't negotiate. You don't say no. Because poverty teaches obedience. You watch managers speak boldly. They aren't smarter than you. They're safer. Safety gives confidence. Confidence gets mistaken for competence. You begin to understand the real hierarchy. It's not intelligence. It's not effort. It's buffer. One unexpected expense hits. Your phone breaks. Your rent increases. Your hours get cut. You spiral quietly. You don't ask for help right away. Pride survives even in poverty. But pride doesn't pay. So you borrow. You promise. You feel small. Debt creeps in like fog. Not dramatic. Just constant. Interest becomes another invisible tax on being poor. You pay more for everything. Money. Transport. Mistakes. You start to notice how systems treat you. Forms are confusing. Processes are slow. Support lines never answer. Everything assumes you have time, money, and patience. You have none of the three. You stop dreaming big. Not because you stopped wanting more. But because wanting hurts. Hope becomes dangerous. You learn to live smaller. You stop buying things that inspire you. You stop going places that remind you of what you don't have. You become efficient at disappointment. And yet, you keep going. That's the part nobody sees. You wake up again. You show up again. You try again. Even when motivation is gone. Even when gratitude feels forced. You don't survive because you're optimistic. You survive because you're durable. And durability is misunderstood. People think resilience means smiling through pain. It doesn't. It means standing up even when standing hurts. But durability has a cost. You are aging faster than you should. Stress lives in your shoulders. Worry lives in your chest. Your laughter sounds shorter now. Your silence lasts longer. Still, tomorrow arrives. And you face it. Not heroically. Not dramatically. Quietly. Relentlessly. This is what it sucks about being poor. It doesn't just take your money. It takes your youth, your patience, your belief that life is fair. And it does it slowly enough that most people never notice. At some point, something changes inside you. It's not sudden. It doesn't announce itself. It's anger. Not the loud kind. The quiet, controlled kind that lives behind your eyes. You notice it when someone says, "Why don't poor people just make better choices?" You want to answer. But you don't. Because explaining takes energy. And you've learned to conserve it. You start seeing the world differently. Rules feel flexible, but only for people with money. Mistakes feel permanent, but only for people without it. You realize morality is easier when consequences are soft. When you're poor, every mistake echoes. You become sharp, not cruel. Efficient. You read people quickly. You sense danger early. You adapt fast. Poverty trains intelligence that schools don't measure. You learn how to stretch meals, how to read moods, how to negotiate without leverage, how to survive without guarantees. You are observant. You are resourceful. But nobody calls that talent. They call it struggle. You watch people waste opportunities you would kill for. They quit jobs casually. They travel to find themselves. They fail and recover easily. You don't envy their success. You envy their permission to fail. At work, you notice inefficiencies. You see better systems, smarter methods, faster solutions. You keep them to yourself. Why give your best ideas to a system that barely pays you? Poverty teaches you to protect your value. Even if it means hiding it. You become cautious. Trust is expensive. You've seen what happens when people know you're desperate. They underpay you. They overpromise. They disappear. So you keep distance. You don't overshare. You don't dream out loud. You've learned that vulnerability invites exploitation. You start measuring people by how safe they feel. Not how kind. Not how smart. How safe. Your circle gets smaller. Not because you're antisocial. Because poverty doesn't allow many mistakes. One wrong friend can cost you everything. You start saying no more often. Not loudly. Quietly. You avoid situations where money is expected. You decline invitations that require pretending. You are not antisocial. You are self-preserving. There are moments when anger leaks out. A cashier looks at you differently. A landlord assumes the worst. A stranger speaks slowly, carefully. Like you're fragile. You're not fragile. You've carried more weight than most people ever will. But anger has nowhere to go. You can't punch systems. You can't argue with reality. So you swallow it. And swallowing anger has consequences. It turns inward. You start blaming yourself. Maybe I'm not good enough. Maybe I waited too long. Maybe I missed something. You replay the past. That decision. That risk you didn't take. That opportunity you couldn't afford. You forget how narrow your choices actually were. You forget how stacked the game was. Society loves individual stories. They hate structural ones. They'll show you the one person who escaped poverty. And call it proof that anyone can. They won't show you the thousands who worked just as hard. And stayed stuck. Survivorship sounds inspiring. But it's incomplete. You don't want pity. You want honesty. You want someone to admit. This is harder than it looks. That effort doesn't scale equally. That starting points matter. That luck is louder than people admit. Still, you keep going. Even when the anger turns into numbness. Even when motivation disappears. You show up. Because stopping isn't an option. Because people depend on you. Because rent doesn't care about your feelings. You find small joys. A quiet morning. A meal that lasts. A laugh that feels real. You learn to appreciate stability more than excitement. Peace becomes the dream. Not luxury. Not fame. Peace. And that tells you everything about what poverty has taken. It didn't just limit your choices. It rewrote your definition of success. At some point, you stop asking when things will change. Not because you've given up. Because you've learned not to depend on promises. You've heard every version of advice. Work harder. Think positive. Just save. Start a side hustle. They all sound reasonable. They all ignore one thing. You are already operating at maximum capacity. You don't lack discipline. You lack slack. People who escape poverty often tell the story backward. They talk about grit. They talk about mindset. They skip the moment something finally went right. A lucky break. A connection. A window that opened just long enough. They don't lie. They just simplify. Because admitting luck makes success feel fragile. You've noticed something else too. Most exits from poverty aren't dramatic. They're boring. A slightly better job. A consistent schedule. A stable expense disappearing. No applause. No viral moment. Just pressure easing, a little. Enough to breathe. Enough to think beyond next week. That's when things actually start to change. Not when motivation appears, but when panic quiets down. You begin to plan again. Small plans. Safe plans. You don't chase dreams anymore. You build ladders. Slowly. Carefully. You still mess up sometimes. But now mistakes don't threaten your survival. That's the real difference. Not success. Safety. And once you taste safety, you understand something painful. This was never about laziness. Or intelligence. Or effort. It was about margin. You look back at the version of yourself who had none. You feel respect. They endured things nobody applauded. They survived days nobody recorded. They didn't quit. They adapted. Most people will never know what that costs. They'll never know the exhaustion of pretending you're fine, while calculating your future in your head. They'll never know how heavy dignity feels when you're carrying it alone. If you could say one thing to the world, it would be this. Poverty is not a personality flaw. It's a condition. And conditions shape behavior. They shape choices. They shape risk tolerance. They shape dreams. You don't need saving. You need room. Room to fail. Room to rest. Room to try again without everything collapsing. That's it. Not pity. Not lectures. Not motivation posters. Just room. You still wake up early. But now it's quieter inside. You still think about money. But it no longer controls every thought. You don't feel rich. You feel stable. And stability feels like luxury when you've lived without it. You understand now why being poor sucks. Not because it makes you weak. But because it demands strength every single day. And never calls it heroic. This story doesn't end with riches. It ends with truth. And the truth is simple. Millions of people are not failing at life. Life is failing them quietly. And tomorrow morning, they'll wake up. And try again anyway. Just like you did. Just like you still do.